Inside this room, all of my dreams become realities, and some of my realities become dreams.
What in the wide, wide world of sports is going on here? Alive! It's alive! It's alive!
You are listening to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute. Here are your hosts, Alan Sanders and Walt Murray.
Welcome back to The Wilder Ride, getting wilder by the minute, a podcast where we are breaking down and celebrating young Frankenstein, one intellectually and philosophically entertaining minute at a time. I'm Alan Sanders.
And I'm Walt Murray.
And joining us today, once again, someone whose current podcast deals a little bit with someone who has been reanimated from the dead. Let's welcome back Eric Nash, co-host of the Watchmen Minute. Welcome back, Eric.
Hey, thank you. Glad to be back.
And would you consider Dr. Manhattan to be someone that has been somehow mysteriously resurrected or reanimated from the dead?
Yeah, that's a very good point. Great way to describe it. And we've recently gone over those minutes that are at least recording-wise. Probably will have come out just pretty recently to this airing.
Although the difference between our creature and or Dr. Manhattan is where he can see all things at once through time simultaneously and has powers beyond compare, near godlike. The closest thing we get is somebody with a godlike complex whose creature can barely walk.
Yep.
Bit of a difference.
Big difference.
All right.
And Dr. Manhattan's so good, too, that he plays the role of Dr. Frankenstein as well. I mean, he's the one that brings himself together.
That's true. He is his own creation.
Yeah.
He's both creation and creator.
Interesting twist on the reanimation.
All right, I've got to ask this before we get into it because I'm a big fan of The Watchmen. Told you last minute that it's one of the comic book stories that as a teenager, when it came out 1 month at a time as an issue, as one compact story, I was just so blown away by the scope and the depth of the writing. There was so much material. They would have pages in the very beginning and the back of each comic book that were either excerpts from notes or from newspaper clippings, and I read every stitch of it because I was just so enamored with the story. Let me ask you this, Eric. They had to make a couple of really significant changes to the very end of The Watchmen, and without giving away the end of your podcast, and I don't want to do any of the spoilers, do you like what they did differently in the movie versus the end in the comic book with the invasion of, let's say, an otherworldly type of invasion?
I would have to say that I'm pretty good with it. I don't know that I'd say I love that that's the way it ends, but for the movie, I think it probably makes sense.
Is it just better for a modern movie audience to kind of understand what the intent maybe of what Alan Moore was writing?
Well, there's so much other stuff that they would have had to have thrown in, too, that's in the comic book that's not in the movie. So they would have had to throw in stuff about this mysterious island and the people there. And time-wise, it's very understandable. Now, the great thing is, though, is that pretty famous and infamous Damon Lindelof is, for HBO, is working on a series, a TV series for HBO that may go multiple seasons, but for right now, they're just doing a pilot, and they have a director for it, and I forget her name. I think she's maybe worked on Game of Thrones or some other Netflix show, I think. That's underway. They even recently released cast information with some couple of very veteran actors, such as Don Johnson and Louis Gossett Jr.
Well, maybe I missed because you were telling us, I've been trying to recall the director, but what's the series? Is it going to be based in the Watchmen world?
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's what Damon Lindelof has recently also said, just like the day before the casting kind of got leaked or what have you. He put out something where he said he's considering it a remix.
A remix.
So it's not a straight adaptation, or pretty close to straight adaptation that Zack Snyder did for our movie that we're going over. But
is it going to have some of the same characters?
It's not a sequel either, but it's maybe somewhat sequel-ish because things that did happen in the original book are supposed to have happened in this universe.
Well, one thing that's going to be
that he's creating.
One thing that might be difficult, but hopefully if they can capture it. One of the things I did really like when I watched the Watchmen movie the first time was how stylized it was. It really felt like I was watching a unique movie. It wasn't I knew that it was based on the comic book, and I knew they were trying to do some things that would parallel the actual, even the panels. You could sometimes even say, oh, there's the shot, of...
Very, very faithfully recreated, yeah.
Oh, what's the name of the guy at the very beginning that gets thrown out the window? His name is...
Comedian.
Yeah, Comedian, yeah. When Comedian gets thrown out the window, I mean, panel for panel, you can watch, and that was so faithfully recreated. But then to drop...
It's the Zack Snyder slow-mo, his classic style for him, that makes so much sense. To try to recreate the panels of a comic book that way, you would need to slow it down and nearly stop it at that point that matches the panel when he's out the window.
Well, the director for the TV version is Nicole Castle, who has been working on Westworld.
Oh, Westworld, really?
Yeah, so she's going to bring a lot to the table.
Well, if they can capture that look and feel, because I did like the look and feel. Again, I have to go back and give the movie another shot, and I think, like you said, maybe it's I need the director's cut. There's just so much packed in the comic book to try to actually unpack it for a movie and keep it within 2 or 2.5 or however long the Ultimate Edition is. It's tough. I'm a big, huge fan of the Lord of the Rings movies. That is my all-time favorite movie. I consider all 3 parts as just one big, long movie, and they get even better when you go to the director's cuts. And I'm just trying to imagine, the first movie, 3.5 hours director's cut. The second movie, almost 4 hours, and then 4.5 for the final installment. It's just a lot for a movie-going audience to sit through, and I love it because it's, to me, so well done. So I may check out the Ultimate Edition just to kind of give myself that sense of what was the Ultimate Vision before it was pared down. You there?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I think I mentioned last time. Is I actually haven't seen the Ultimate Edition nor the Black Fader by itself as a separate disc cartoon. I haven't seen neither of those. I should by the end of this. Really,
hopefully you will
do one or the other,
and maybe even do maybe a bonus episode, kind of giving your thoughts on that.
Yeah, certainly.
All right, well, we are now in the beginning of minute 79, so let's remind the audience what's taken place and what is still to come here in this episode. We have got a young Dr. Frankenstein. I keep wanting to say Frankenstein now.
Frankenstein.
Yes,
we can say Frankenstein the rest of the way.
I can say Frankenstein. We have a young Dr. Frankenstein who is taken to the stage, and he is eventually going to address the audience, and by the end of this minute, he is going to reveal his creature to this audience that's supposed to be both intellectually and philosophically advanced from your typical modern going audience. So let's start this off, Walt. Something that you even said until we broke this down 1 minute at a time, almost missed you when someone tries to shush him from the audience.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're shushing him or if they're shushing the other people in the audience, but that is definitely kind of a crazy thing. If I've ever noticed it before, I sure didn't remember it, but it is funny to get that shushing sound right up front.
Prepping for this, when we talked about this way back at the beginning of the year, and I went back and I revisited the material and just said, I need to sit back, no pad of paper, no nothing, just watch it like for the first time, and I laughed hysterically because it fits right in the middle of this word scientists, which already has the hiss sort of built in with the assonance, the alliteration of the word scientists. And for him to start off with
my fellow scientists.
My fellow scientists, and then all of a sudden you hear him go, so he finishes the word as if it's being really dragged out while he's being shushed. It's hysterical.
It really is. And it's so bizarre to hear that in this kind of setting, too.
And he's the main act.
Yeah.
And he hasn't even said the first 3 words. It's my fellow scientist. He's on the 3rd word, and he's being shushed by somebody from the audience. Eric, did you happen to catch it? Because Walt said he didn't really remember that until we started looking at this 1 minute at a time.
Definitely later on when I was in my teens or what have you. I mean, that's something I caught, I think, then. And, it's almost like I did have a thought about it's playing off of him already kind of saying the hiss sound word, right, what have you, and the word scientist. And it's almost like it could be a chain reaction that people in the audience, at least one person in the audience, maybe more, got on ball real quick with the idea of doing this kind of disparagement.
Obviously, this group, if we had any idea that they did not have a whole lot of expectation, if anything, maybe even disdain for Dr. Frankenstein, we thought so last minute when nobody clapped besides the MC introducing him. Then they're hissing him in his very first opening 3 words. certainly setting the tone that this audience is a hostile audience.
They are not on board with him. And it's not what I would expect from a scientific audience, because the next thing is, not to jump too far ahead, but as he starts to kind of launch into his explanation of what's going on, the audience laughs at him.
Right.
And he is really being derided by them. That's not really what you would expect from a scientific audience.
No, they're not acting like, in fact, they're acting like a group of just regular theater goers who are just there to be given, like they're there for the entertainment.
It's like a Mystery Science Theater 3000 crowd, not a scientist.
They're already doing an MST3K version, just wading in on the conversation. And here's who's supposed to be there based on his opening lines. And I'm going to go to the script here because there was a whole lot more to this opening monologue than just what we get in the movie. He actually addresses them, which is faithful to the script, and he follows this to the letter. My fellow scientists and neurosurgeons. Scientists, that's already it conveys. Most people think, oh, then you must be smart. Well, we all know neuroscientists. I mean, we're talking brain surgeons. We always use that phrase. If somebody is just brilliant, like, what are you, a brain surgeon? The brightest of the brightest are supposed to be in this audience.
Right. Or, hey, that guy's no brain surgeon.
Right.
Yeah.
Or you use it the opposite way. You say, hey, obviously, there's a couple of bulbs short in the chandelier.
Right.
Yeah, he's no brain scientist. He's no neurosurgeon. He does say, coming from a background, believe me, and here's where he tries to say, look, I was where you were. As conservative and traditionally grounded in scientific fact as any of you, I began an experiment, incredulous as it may sound, the reanimation of dead tissue. And this is where, instead of getting the, they all laugh at him.
They laugh at him. Which has to be a complete slap in the face for him.
Eric, have you ever been on stage and without it being a comedy, gotten yourself laughed at?
I don't think so. I hope not. And I have been on stage a little bit. I do play a little guitar and for church. It's been a few years now, but done that. But and that's certainly not something that's supposed to be funny. But
if you took to the stage and you were introducing to what you thought were fellow peers and scientists, and they did this to you, I got to be honest, Gene Wilder does a great job of just powering through because he doesn't show any signs that this is bugging him. But if it had happened to me, I'd be fumbling.
It's definitely off-putting. It would definitely be a surprise. And I mean, he handles it well. And he has to know. I mean, he has to know. We saw him in the early classroom scenes where he gets kind of played by Brainy Smurf. So he knows that this is not seen as mainstream science. But it is kind of an interesting reaction from the audience to get laughter like that.
In terms of setting up a scene for a movie and setting tone and for the audience, do you think the reason that we are seeing such obvious just animosity from the audience is it makes it that much harder to win the audience over? Is that what we're trying to establish here, that they are not going to accept anything that this quack has to say, at least until they see the creature for themselves?
That's a really great point, especially, again, for when I was a kid. I mean, that would be a pretty big deal to have an inkling, at least. I mean, I don't think I caught all these things, like I said, but have an inkling that, yeah, they're not really crazy about him and his work.
I mean, it definitely is setting this very negative tone. They're not being polite and giving even just a little small golf clap. They're not kind of giving the, okay, whatever. They're almost, like I said, antagonistic. It's a very, the animosity is, I feel it coming through the screen. Like, he has no friend in that audience.
No, he does not. He does not. In which it is kind of odd, and maybe we're over breaking down this one, but it is...
Really? 1 minute at a time, and now we're over breaking things down?
I know. And Dad would say, hey, it's just a movie.
It's just a movie. Idiots!
You have the Transylvania Neurological Society. You have, what is the other?
The Bucharest Academy of Science.
Bucharest Academy of Science. So... Number one, you have those two on the placard. If I saw that, I'd be like, nope, headed to the pub. I'm not I don't care about that. That's not my bag.
It's not my bag, baby.
For the pedestrian people, we're headed to the pub, not to this performance. So you're
this sounds an awful lot like learning.
No, thank you. I'm good. So you're getting the upper crust intellectual group that goes into this.
You would think, though, that an intellectual group would at least also have a sense of decorum, of etiquette.
They would have a sense of decorum, but also everybody knows that this has happened 5 times before. So they know that the science is there to reanimate life.
Well, that goes back to my point yesterday. It's like everybody knows, apparently, the horrible history of the Frankenstein name. But
absolutely.
I guess to me it's jarring because we're already seeing an audience that's not even going to give him the courtesy clap. Not even a
they're not.
courtesy of like, okay, we expect your show to suck, but we're at least going to say, since you just started, it hasn't sucked yet. So, but they don't even do that.
There's no golf clap here. And, if you go to a performance, you are supposed to at least be polite.
Right. Isn't that there? I mean, Eric, come on. You said you play. I mean, let's say you hit a bad chord or something. You kind of know if you've got a friendly audience. They kind of give you the, okay, whatever. We still like the song. Thanks for performing. I mean, you get at least the courtesy clap, don't you?
Oh, yeah. Of course, yeah. Yeah, especially among a church crowd.
That would be actually pretty bad if you got this.
Compared to a scientist crowd.
Could you imagine this in church?
Oh,
We've got a guest reverend coming in today. It's like, wow.
Yeah, that would be bad.
Well, here are the lines that we actually have in the script that was either edited out or they chose not to film it. Again, I haven't been able to find, and I wish there was a repository of everything that was officially cut. There's only been a handful of things we've been able to find. But right after he says the reanimation of dead tissue and they all laugh at him, once the twittering calms down, he continues in the script, an experiment, hopelessly monumental in its exploration of the potentialities of the central nervous system, but the results of which, in my humble opinion, could change the very meaning of life. Then again, according to the script, let's get another reaction from the audience. It doesn't say whether it's laughing or shock or whatever. He continues, I have constructed from medically proven dead human components a living creature. The audience reacts once again. He continues that this creature might for a day or an hour or a minute lie in some liquid solution and pulsate. That would be revolutionary and a revolutionary breakthrough, but not quite worthy of so distinguished a gathering. What I have to offer you might possibly be the gateway to immortality. And that's where we pick up, as that's where the movie actually has him say that line, the gateway to immortality. Ladies and gentlemen, may I present the creature. So Walt, he went on for a while in the script.
Yes, he did. I mean, we kind of have another situation where I'm really glad the editors got to work here and pared it down and got they got the heart of where he was going with that, but they were able to condense it into a more Walt-friendly speech there.
Simple members of the audience.
For those of us who would rather be at the pub than the lecture.
There's a lot of syllables in those words he's using.
Come on, man.
Well, here's something I do find somewhat redeeming for my argument back. If you remember last time we had the guys from BK on the air, I had a problem with why is Dr. Frankenstein, still calling himself that at that time, using the stethoscope on the creature before they even ascend to the heavens to reanimate.
There you go.
It's proven here in the script. He wanted to make sure that every piece of tissue was dead so he could prove that his stuff worked.
Yeah, I thought about that as you were reading that, and I also thought back to the original classroom scene where they were talking about, was it
Vermicelli?
Vermicelli, there you go, that was supposedly reanimated, which arguably may or may not have been. But he
does make a distinction here, like, oh, if people would just make something kind of pulsate for just a minute or an hour.
That's exactly right.
But I've done something far more important than that.
You really see the narcissism and the God complex here.
There's absolutely that in this speech. And I love when he goes, if I may be so humble.
Yeah. Which, anytime somebody starts with, let me be so humble, you know they're not being humble.
No, it's the exact opposite of humility
opposite.
Coming through here. In my humble opinion, could change the very meaning of life. He does go straight through, though, to, ladies and gentlemen, may I present, dramatic pause, the creature, who, Walt, he comes... Peter Boyle as the creature comes stumbling through like he's been on a 3-day drunk.
Yeah, he does. He's got that long white medical
like he's dressed for surgery or something.
Yeah. I mean, he makes an entrance when he comes through.
Was this planned because they've got all this other stuff? It seems like he's ready to present a show. You would think maybe there's been rehearsal, maybe they've gone through this once or twice, and yet he comes on like he's barely able to walk. Was that meant for shock and to fool the audience? Is this now Dr. Frankenstein trying to like...
Little showmanship?
Showmanship, yeah. Look, he could barely walk, and now get ready for what I'm about to show you.
Yeah, I kind of think so. Eric, what do you think?
I don't know. That's a crazy take on it, I think. Because they would have to go through the effort of teaching him, okay, at this point B,
dumb it down.
Like your kind of more natural earlier self back in the first month of training.
Right.
They would have to. Oh, that'd be tough.
He's got that. He comes out like he's just been lumbering.
Yeah.
Just before the scene where we play charades because he goes out of control with Igor lighting a match for a cigarette. We see him kind of walking that same way when he first stumbles through the curtain.
Well, and he is a big, lumbering creature. I mean, for lack of a better word. Yeah, I'm reaching for it here. But yeah, and so he is kind of big and lumbering, and he does have those gigantic shoes on. He isn't totally agile anyway, even at his best.
No, but, well, funny, you should say that. So keep that in mind because we're not going to get to it this week, but
I know. I'm trying to stay in the minute.
That's what. See, it's so hard. It's so hard for me to look at this minute and not have the context of this entire scene because when you willfully introduce your creature in maybe the worst possible way, stumbling forward in a smock like he just came off the operating table. And you mentioned, both of you guys, that it's sort of like when he first was reanimated, he was just stumbling around. This had to be planned.
I've got to think that it was a production choice on the part of Gene and Mel Brooks. I don't know exactly why. But, of course, if he comes dancing out, we know he's probably capable of, I think it loses something.
Oh, no, I think you're right. I think you could not show him coming out as being highly trained.
No.
And highly his motor skills being like, I'll honestly tell you that at some point we're going to see his motor skills far more superior than my own.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because I can't do anything that's going to be coming up next week. But we don't want to go to... See, we're teasing. We want the audience to continue to stay with us.
And hear what actually happens. And I think it's less intimidating. I think if he just walks out and everything's cool and fine, it makes him more accessible and more human. Where when he comes stumbling out or awkwardly walking out like he does, that it is more monster-like.
It's more shocking to the audience?
Shocking. Yeah, I think so.
Well, certainly if the audience was sitting there and we talked about their attitude, if they were basically arms folded, I'm not about to believe anything, to have this big giant thing come taking 2 or 3 lumbering steps through the curtain with the spotlight hitting them, that would wake you up, and it seems to wake the audience up because you hear them almost ready to scream and run out of the theater.
Well, people jump up from their seats. I mean, you can see the audience react to it physically, and you can hear the screams, and it definitely goes from laughter to something completely different.
Can I ask? Could Igor have been behind the curtain and kind of got him to tripped him just a little bit,
shoved him out there? Yeah, could have been.
Okay, start stumbling.
Could have been.
Get out there, you big oaf! That's your cue. Could be. He doesn't look like he's shoved, but I mean, who knows? Igor is always playing. Actually, and we'll be having to pay really close attention because Igor is actually in the opera house at some point.
Yes, he is.
Yeah. We're gonna have to show that later. I do find it interesting that, again, here's a group of supposedly scientists and neurosurgeons. If you told me that you had just reanimated a corpse from parts, which, of course, we leave the parts out because he never did do parts. The only 2 parts was the body and the brain. But if you had reanimated and I see this thing come lumbering, I wouldn't have screamed as a scientist. So I'm trying to figure out, again, what is going on with this audience. It's like they're the worst possible scientific audience that he could have possibly asked for.
Well, and if you didn't know the history of the Frankenstein lineage and you were trying to explain to most scientists that, oh yeah, I'm reanimating life, they'd think you broke into the medicine cabinet. And then to have the evidence come stumbling out at 7 feet tall, monstrous beast, yeah, it's going to get a reaction.
I can honestly say in my life, thanks to my stature, I have never lumbered on stage and made anybody scream about anything.
Yeah, no,
laugh, yes, but scream, no.
I've appeared in a lot of other ways. Lumbering's probably not the right word. I've crashed through a lot of things.
So in this moment, I guess what we're supposed to really get to is it's uncomfortable for the doctor. The creature doesn't look like he's learned really anything. We have no idea. Maybe this did just happen yesterday when we were last in the cell, and Dr. Frankenstein is not really taking it seriously, the whole idea of training his monster, because the way he comes out, there's absolutely nothing impressive about him at this point, beyond the fact, well, okay, you brought somebody back from the dead. I guess we should give you
we'll give
props
you,
for
give
that.
you some kudos.
Before I know this minute kind of blends into the next, and I don't want to rush to the end because we're going to go right into the next minute tomorrow. Eric, before I start to look at these last closing moments, do you have anything that you've had in your notes? Because I feel like I'm sort of monopolizing what's happening in the theater, but what do you have from this scene that you wanted to talk about?
The only other thing I think I really would need to talk about is in the early 40s seconds, 41, 42, 43-ish, the close-up of one of the audience members, scientists there with, and a lot of them have mustache and a lot of the other shots, but this one, out of the one that's closest up on, and he's putting his hand to his mouth as they're laughing. They're all laughing, but he's laughing too, and him just putting his hand to his mouth. I mean, it's just so posh and upper crust, as we were saying earlier.
And he's got kind of that hipster mustache.
Yeah, it looks like the Monopoly guy, actually, with the handlebar mustache. And he's almost like, tosh, you know?
Exactly.
He doesn't even want to laugh. He's just going to go, toss. Very pompous, very arrogant.
Yeah, you almost expect him to have a cigarette on a cigarette holder and...
Oh, yeah, like the Penguin or something.
Yes, exactly.
Which, again, we'll point out, nobody's smoking, even in that close-up. I don't see anybody smoking, and yet we saw the smoke-filled theater yesterday, so I'm not sure where it's coming from. It is funny how he's, like, using just his two fingers on his lips in that moment. Like, tosh.
What insanity.
What silliness. Oh, no wonder your family name is
Dr.
terrible.
Frankenstein...
Do you get any allusions here to King Kong?
It is. It's very similar to King Kong. In fact, it does kind of remind me of the Jack Black King Kong in the scene that they had in the theater there.
I don't know of this King Kong of which you speak.
It was a fan film.
Okay, yeah. Oh, yeah.
If that.
How does a guy go from making the greatest movie of all time and follow it up with a worst remake of all time?
School of Rock.
Well, that was bad. That was Jack Black. I'm talking about Peter Jackson, the director and writer. Eric, let me ask you, did you see or do you find some of those strains that remind you of King Kong when we're kind of playing to an audience?
I certainly hadn't thought of it, but yeah, that's very true.
Because that's all I can think of is when to change from now, because this is a complete departure from when you're making sort of the homage to the Frankenstein movies. We already know that, ironically, talk about stitching a creature together. We know that Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks sort of stitched together the script from pieces, or at least allusions to all of the other Frankenstein movies from Universal Pictures. But this is a complete shift to something that's not in any of the movies, where we're going to have a show. We're going to, bring the creature out and do a little show. And it reminded me of like, okay, so now we're doing the King Kong thing, because the minute I saw we were heading to, let's bring him out to an audience and let him perform, that it's not going to go well. And I only had it in my head because King Kong. You thought you had the beast under control. You thought you're smarter than the beast, and it turns out you're not going to be. And that's all I kept thinking of here is we're getting that illusion of I'm better than the beast. I know more. I am, again, the pride of Dr. Frankenstein.
Yeah, and it is interesting. You have a lot of pride in this scene because you have the audience, which is kind of arrogantly deriding Dr. Frankenstein. You have, of course, Dr. Frankenstein, who arrogantly rises himself above everybody in the world. Then you kind of have that pride shattered as the audience sees what has been created.
Well, let me tie this back to a little bit to the Watchmen for a minute as we begin to wind the minute down back to our guest, Eric Nash. There's a character in the Watchmen story who is worried about the power and some of the arrogance of some of these superheroes. So this idea of pride leading to the fall, it's a pretty universal trope in many different stories. Oh,
yeah, sure. I mean, it's... there's Star Wars and the classic Joseph Campbell mythology stuff. Yeah, that's built in there to storytelling and hero's journey type stuff that they have to fall a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's for us as the audience, that's supposed to, I guess, be our teaching moment when we realize, oh, look, I'm finding myself trying to think that I've learned from my kids, I am not my own God. I thought I had control of my creations. I do not.
No, when it comes to kids.
No, actually, my kids are just like this scene. Yeah. Just when I think I've got them ready to perform, they go do something stupid.
Yes, and I am just like this scene.
You are. Yeah, my wife would say, you're just like this.
What are you talking about?
First of all, you come stumbling out of the curtain drunk. Then you think you have a song and dance act, and you end up being like taken out in handcuffs.
Well, and I'm sure that my wife has to think, every dumb things the kids do, it's their dad's fault.
It's their dad's fault. All right. Well, we want to continue this into tomorrow because I know there's a lot going on in this theatrical performance. We are only just getting the inkling with the creature coming up on stage. Eric already asked about your notes, and we had a great moment to see the Monopoly guy down front laughing and going tosh tosh. Walt, anything in your notes that we didn't cover?
No, I think we covered everything. And, one thing I kind of am noticing as we're running the minute here is the amount of space Peter Boyle takes up is immense. I mean, he really, when he walks out on stage, he becomes the focal point of of your view there.
Well, there's very cool cinematography, and I think that's why, outside of, dressing him down and hiding what's coming later, but when he's in white and he's coming through basically a dark curtain, a dark theater in the spotlight, there is absolutely no doubt your eye is drawn center stage, center of the screen, because he's making his entrance.
No question.
Let's just be honest, that must be a tablecloth, right?
Yes.
Or a circus tent.
It's a tent. So, as we finish this minute up, Eric, where can people learn? We mention the Watchmen from time to time, and there's a reason for that. Where can people come hear your podcast?
Yeah, even more specifically, Travis Bow's network of sorts, realpodcastnetwork.com/Watchmen Minute is the true home base. We're on all the platforms. And the only other thing I can throw in now, we could talk a little bit more about tomorrow maybe, will be my next movie by minute project will be Almost Famous Minute.
Almost Famous. Yeah, you just announced that not too long ago on the Facebook page. You actually played a cool game. You said someone else mentioned it somewhere else during one of the other many Movies by Minutes podcasts, and you let us all guess for a while. I really thought I had figured it out with Tootsie, and you had me going. Yeah. But you don't. You're not doing Tootsie. You're going to do Almost Famous, which is actually a really, really good movie. Walt, where can people learn a little bit more about us?
Well, we would love it if y'all would go out to patreon.com/thewilderride, spend a couple minutes there and look at some of the things that we have to offer for those of you who become a part of our team here. We do have some expenses that we are covering at this time. We do have one other person who's helping out with that, and Alan will mention her in just a minute. But we would love for you to come on board, even if you just say, hey, this is a few minutes of good entertainment a day, so here's $1 a month for you guys. That would be a big help to us. So, again, that's patreon.com/thewilderride. And also, we always want you to come over to Facebook, find us over at facebook.com/thewilderride, and join our listeners group and get involved in the conversation there.
And the name to which Walt referred was Tara Bain. Thanks for being an associate producer supporter of The Wilder Ride. As an associate producer, we mention you from time to time, and we'll mention all the other ones who want to step up and add to this journey with us. We appreciate your support out there. It makes it a little bit easier for us to bring it to you day in and day out of Season 1 here. And we've only just scratched the surface. This is just Season 1, so we appreciate you being out there. And all of you guys out there, whether you can donate or not, that's not the point. Being part of our audience, that's really what makes us feel like this is all worthwhile. So come on back tomorrow, where we are going to wrap up the work week on minute number 80 with the audience still freaking out at Frankenstein's creation show. I was thinking creature and creation, and I created a new word. Frankenstein's creature coming out through the curtain, and we are going to end with me once again reminding myself that maybe it's not kid-like, maybe it's dog-like with the way the doctor treats his creation, all when we come back on this Wilder Ride.
And learn about Dr. Frankenstein's creature.
Creature. It's a creature in making.
Creature.
For the philosophically and scientifically oriented.
Let's just go to the pub.
I'm with you. Let's skip the night. It's only one night only.